At a time that many around the United States are experiencing hot, dry weather, I thought it would be a good time to talk about drought. I'm going to speak primarily about drought, a little bit about floods, but more on drought because drought more directly impacts energy resource adequacy. The pertinence to resource adequacy of droughts and floods. They impact the supply of clean, reliable drinking water, the water that's needed to maintain proper hygiene, waste management, the maintenance of energy infrastructure, homes and farms, and also most pertinent to resource adequacy in the sense of energy adequacy. In 2022, water provided 53% of Montana's in-state electricity generation. That's according to the United States Energy Information Agency. The definition of drought by the American Meteorological Society, quote, a period of abnormally dry weather sufficiently long enough to cause a serious hydrological imbalance. Some divide drought into 4 or 5 categories based primarily on the adverse effects to the natural water supply, agriculture, the economy, etc. An article was written entitled "Severe Drought Doomed the Earliest Empire." The collapse in 2200 BC of the Akkadian Empire, the first imperial regime the world had ever known, appears to have been brought on by the abrupt onset of a severe drought that lasted 300 years. Floods impact energy resource adequacy differently than droughts. Generally, hydroelectric dams function during floods. Floods can damage energy infrastructure just as they damage private property and business structures. That would be more so than drought. The death toll from floods tends to be more dramatic and less readily remediable than droughts. The death toll from floods tends to be more dramatic and less readily remediable than droughts. Excluding infectious disease epidemics, floods lead the list of causes of death by natural disaster in the historical record. I'm going to go through the top 4 in terms of number of deaths. Number 1 is 4 million deaths in the China flood of 1931. Number 2, 2 million deaths in China's Yellow River flood, 1887. Number 3, 655,000, China's Tangshan earthquake, 1976. Number 4, 500,000 died in East Pakistan's Bola cyclone in 1970. Number 1, 2, and 3 can arguably be stated to have occurred before the industrialization of these countries, so it cannot be said to be from human-induced climate change. Industrialization in China started roughly 1953 with Mao Zedong's 5-year plan and didn't begin to accelerate much until after President Nixon's visit to China in 1972. And China was considered to be in the early stages of industrialization until roughly 1990. Talk about floods in the United States a little bit. And at first, I'm going to highlight California. Geological evidence indicates that mega floods occurred in California in AD years 212, 440, 603, 1029, 1300, 1418, and 1750. Plus a large one in 1605, where a flood was thought to be potentially the largest of the prior 2,000 years. The LA flood of 1825 changed the course of the Los Angeles River. The Sacramento flood of 1850 devastated the new city. California can be thought of as the first Western United States to industrialize. It started with the gold rush in 1845, and there was significant industrialization in California by 1860. So it's notable that California had major floods prior to industrialization. How about Montana? There was a Missoula flood estimated 2,000-year duration that started 15,000 years ago. Little background on it, because I think it's so interesting. The last glacial maximum was 25 to 30,000 years ago when ice sheets covered North America, North Europe, North Asia, causing major expansion of deserts and large drops in sea level. And the last ice age is considered to be 12,000 to 18,000 years ago. After that, deglaciation commenced in the Northern Hemisphere, causing an abrupt rise in sea level. Ice sheets caused ice dams, caused flooding into the valleys of western Montana, creating glacial Lake Missoula that eventually flooded to the Pacific Ocean at the mouth of the Columbia River. All this way before industrialization of Montana. And the major glacial melting and sea level rising prior to industrialization by any measurement. It's unlikely that people were affected by ancient California or Missoula droughts and floods. Probably weren't people around, but in ancient Greece and Rome, they made adaptations in order to survive and thrive during droughts and floods. How did the ancient world respond to climate catastrophe? They prayed to the gods. This photo is a depiction of the seal of the Akkadian king in 2200 BC during the drought time. It was praying to the gods for water, and the gods provided, as is supposed to be depicted in this picture. It's great, of course, to pray, but it also need to apply human ingenuity and hard work to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And that's exactly what these ancients did. Aqueducts were fairly well developed in the 9th century BC. Here's a depiction of aqueducts, different types. I think that's a real interesting drawing there that is a depiction of the ancients building these aqueducts. There's the inside of an aqueduct, a depiction of how aqueducts work. I think it's fascinating. And this was many, many, many centuries ago, millennia ago. Cisterns stored the water brought by the aqueducts. This was more in the Middle Ages, more in the ancient times, Middle Ages to ancient times. They did this way back then, these beautiful cisterns. Flood control in the Netherlands is a primary example of ingenuity. Flood control is important for the Netherlands due to its low elevation, much of it below sea level. 2/3 of the land is vulnerable to flooding, plus they have a fairly dense population. Geographer Pytheas described the Low Countries, which is the Netherlands, in 325 BC, stating, quote, "More people died in the struggle against water than in the struggle against men," end of quote. Roman author Pliny of the 1st century AD described the ocean tide sweeping in twice a day over a large stretch of land. What he called the wretched peoples, they were like sailors on ships at high tide and like shipwrecked victims when the tide receded. They lived, by his estimation, wretched lives. By around 1000 AD, people of the Netherlands had significant structural protection underway. Flood control in the Netherlands can be considered an example of a government program that worked. They developed a complex systems of dikes, dams, flood walls, canals, and pumping stations, historically windmills, to provide protection from ocean storms and inflowing rivers, and to keep the low-lying areas dry for agriculture. Windmills are not just picturesque and romantic, but served a critical function in the Netherlands regarding the management of flooding. Back to drought. With the hash line being midway between maximum wet and maximum dry, you could see the ups and downs from 1900 to 2020 is without a clear pattern of up and down for wet or dry weather. And that is pertinent to what I want to talk about next, which is the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. It remains the benchmark drought and extreme heat event in U.S. history. Some pictures of it. Amazing. This is a famous picture of the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl drought lasted about a decade, and it was characterized by severe dust storms that killed people and crops in the entire region. You could see that some level of dust storms was up into Montana, but we didn't bear the brunt of it. So how is this dealt with? Is it dealt with by another example of government programs that can work? Central Valley, California went from Dust Bowl devastation to become the fruit basket of the world. And it was because of programs that FDR put in place in the 1930s. Prior to his hydroelectric dams, there was less than 3% of people in rural Western United States had electricity. And there was no way to control drought or floods. Today, like I said, with those programs from back in the 1930s, today it's the fruit basket of the world. Hopefully the Department of Interior project announced October 2022 will prove fruitful. $200 million for drought resilience projects in the West as part of the program. Projects expected to develop over 1.7 million acre feet of additional water storage capacity, enough to support 6.8 million people for a year. Of course, $210 million is a lot of money, but compared to the trillions poured out in government programs, it seems to be a drop in the bucket. Hopefully it will be used wisely in ways that are fruitful for the people. A more recent example of ingenuity is Brazil's 1 million cisterns program. It's also an example of a functional government program. Lack of access to water in northeastern Brazil's semi-arid region has led to high infant mortality, high incidence of malnutrition, and infectious disease. The solution was structuring rainwater storage to provide water security during the dry season. The rain harvesting program started in 2013, and then after that was proven to be successful, they came up with the second program, One Land, Two Water program. Water collected during the 3 to 4 month rainy season sustains water for drinking, cooking, sanitation, and irrigation during the dry season. This program has been highly successful, has benefited 628,000 families, has increased economic development and food security, is environmentally friendly and community-centered. It has even been brought to other countries that are using it successfully. It's interesting to note that in the United States, there are 11 states in which collecting rainwater is actually illegal. You might have guessed Montana isn't one of them. Because of the success of those that came before us with programs that successfully battled adverse climate, I continue to believe that we can improvise, adapt, and overcome these problems. Because of the success of the past, I read with great interest and ponder 2022 flooding caused by, quote, a barrage of rain melting and mixing with above average snowpack during a quick warm-up. It was said that that's what causes some of the flooding. 2020, like the Yellowstone flooding last year. 2023, severe drought conditions due to low average winter snowpack, early runoff, and above average hot, dry summer conditions. That's considered to be the explanation for the low level of Flathead Lake. But yet in the past, the ancients were able to fix these things. Will we improvise, adapt, and overcome? (2022) Yellowstone River flooding. Here's some photos of it. Very dramatic, somewhat horrifying. Controversial theories about what caused an adverse event. To those I say, interesting theory, but your point is, I believe in solving problems, and I believe we have what it takes to overcome these things. Yellowstone River has multiple tributary rivers and lakes, has 5 major reservoirs, multiple diversion dams, no storage dams. We have multiple opportunities to improvise, adapt, and overcome. (2023) Flathead Lake water level has been low enough to squelch the economy, including tourism and recreation. Again, caused by, we have what it takes to overcome this. Flathead Lake is fed by the SKQ Dam, formerly the Kerr Dam. Beautiful dam. There was a FERC letter April of 2018 that the gates needed repair, and they have until 2025 to repair them. Inability to repair could lead to catastrophic consequences. Could disrepair have anything to do with the current low level of Flathead Lake, or perhaps not planning for circumstances that can cause drought? If either of those are the cause, that can be fixed. I hope I have adequately portrayed the historical record that shows that weather and local climates have always been volatile and treacherous. The ancients figured out that the gods wanted them to do more than pray. People got to work building aqueducts, cisterns, and canals. Just under 100 years ago, our government unleashed a series of innovations that brought electricity and irrigation, as well as flood and drought control, to the Western United States. In the last decade, Brazil instituted the Million Cisterns program that's been highly successful. So today, when we have problems in Montana regarding flood and drought control, I can't help but think that possibly mismanagement and or unwillingness to apply human ingenuity, innovation, hard work, and common sense in order to improvise, adapt, and overcome. I thoroughly believe we can fix these water-related problems. Thank you for listening.